This morning we are continuing our sermon series called Measuring What Matters. And today I'm reading from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. When they came to the crowd, a man met Jesus. He knelt before him, saying, "Lord, show mercy to my son. He is epileptic and suffers terribly, for he often falls into the fire or the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him." Jesus answered, "You faithless and crooked generation, how long will I be with you? How long will I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." Then Jesus spoke harshly to the demon, and it came out of the child, who was healed from that time on. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and said, "Why couldn't we throw the demon out?" "Because you have little faith," he said. "I assure you that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, 'Go from here to there,' and it will go. There will be nothing that you can't do." In 2004, a documentary called Super Size Me was released to the public. Do you want to show that first slide? And it caused quite a stir. In it, the independent filmmaker named Morgan Spurlock documented his experiment with eating only fast food. How many of you saw the film? Yeah, it's pretty... Well, for 30 days in 2003, Spurlock, who was in great physical shape, ate nothing but what was on the menu at McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He decided early on that he would eat every item on the menu at least once during that month, and it only took him 9 days to do that. And if he was asked if he wanted to supersize his meal, he had to accept. He couldn't ask for it himself, but he had to accept it if they asked him. Well, after 5 days, Spurlock had gained 9.5 pounds. And was already starting to feel lethargic and depressed, and he even experienced severe headaches, which, interestingly enough, could only be relieved if he ate more McDonald's food. On day 21, he had heart palpitations, and his doctor urged him to stop the experiment, but he persisted against medical advice. At the end of the experiment, after the 30 days, his total weight gain was 24.5 pounds. His body fat increased by 13.5%. His total cholesterol increased by 65 points to an unhealthy 230. And his liver had basically turned to fat. It took him 14 months to lose the weight that he had gained during those 30 days by being on a completely vegan diet. And it took him even longer to regain his physical and emotional well-being. So why did Morgan Spurlock do this experiment in the first place? Well, 2 reasons, really. One was to bring attention to our love affair with fast food and how unhealthy it really is. But the other reason was to point out how the trend toward bigger and bigger portion sizes, especially here in America, is affecting our bodies and our emotional well-being. Over time, portion sizes at fast food restaurants, actually at all restaurants, have increased exponentially. In fact, they have increased so much that plate sizes at restaurants have also had to get bigger. Why? Because, I'm sorry to say, we Americans love things that are big. We love big houses. We love big cars. We love big supermarkets and those big box stores. warehouse stores. And yes, we love big meals. We Americans love things that are big. But how big is too big? Let's talk about food. Over the last 50 to 60 years, meal sizes have increased so much that the average meal is 4 times larger than what was served in the 1950s. If we look at the average size of a fast food meal alone, burgers have gone from 3.9 ounces to 12 ounces, French fries from 2.4 ounces to 6.7 ounces, and soft drinks from just 7 ounces to a whopping 42 ounces. And all this extra food has resulted in extra pounds on our bodies. Did you know that the average American man today weighs 17.6% heavier than in 1960? And ladies, I'm afraid our statistic is even worse. On average, American women are 18.5% heavier than they were 25 years ago. I kind of feel like I need to go to the gym. So let's talk about something else. Houses in the United States, on average, are much larger than in other parts of the world, but they haven't always been that way. In 1970, the average home size was 1,500 square feet, but by 2008, the average had jumped up to 2,500 square feet. And what's really interesting is that as our houses have gotten bigger, our families have gotten smaller. So that now we are living in houses with more square feet per person than we ever have before. Yes, we Americans love our big homes, but how big is too big? And what about cars? This slide is a little hard to see, but despite the price of gas these days, more Americans are buying big trucks and SUVs than ever before. Why is that? We don't know. Perhaps we feel safer in larger vehicles, or maybe it's because we simply like having more legroom and more headroom and more cargo space. Whatever the reason, we like our big cars. But how big is too big? The same is true for the stores in which we shop. In the 1950s, supermarkets became a symbol of American culture, and over time they have gotten larger, and even much larger than their European counterparts. For example, the average American supermarket, you're going to like this, stocks 40,000 unique items, while European stores have about 18,000. And then there's all the big box stores, the Sam's Club and Costco. And could they get any bigger? Probably. But how big is too big? And is bigger really better? Well, Jesus certainly didn't think that bigger was better. Several times in the gospel, Jesus refers to the mustard seed. And he says, it is the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. Well, it's not really. But who's going to argue with Jesus, right? He was right about one thing, and we saw that during the children's moment. The seeds are very, very, very small. Oh my gosh, I got it caught in my fingernail. In fact, it is so small that we can hardly see it when we put it in our hands. And yet, when it is planted and nourished and watered, it is allowed to grow, and it becomes one of the largest plants that there is. In the parable of the mustard seed, Jesus is trying to help us understand the nature of God's kingdom, the realm of God. That God can take something so small and make it into something so big. And it's not through our doing, it's because of God's nature. God is able to take what we have and grow it into something more. And in another part of the gospel, Jesus says to his disciples, if you only had faith the size of a mustard seed, you'd be able to move a mountain from here to there. Faith is that complete confidence or trust that we have in a person or a being. When we say we have faith in God, we are offering our full selves, our complete selves. And we're saying that we have confidence in God, that we trust God, and we are placing our lives in God's hands. And Jesus is saying that it really doesn't take a whole lot of faith in order to do that. In order for God to be active in our lives, it only takes faith the size of a mustard seed. It's a little bit of faith that goes a long way. Now, for us as human beings, and especially as Americans, bigger is better. But for Jesus, it is just the opposite. Smaller is better. Because smaller has possibility. Smaller has potential. When we see something small like a mustard seed, we see something that is insignificant. But Jesus sees something that has possibility. Jesus sees the potential that can unfold from that little mustard seed. He sees the possibilities that we simply cannot see. So for Jesus, less is more. And you know what? Just as I mentioned to the children, we are God's mustard seeds. In a city of 1.5 million people and a state of 6.7 million people, in a country of nearly 319 million people, and in a world of over 7 billion people, we feel small and insignificant, don't we? But Jesus understands the potential of the mustard seed. Jesus understands the potential that we have. And he understands and values that potential that we have to do great things. All we have to do is have faith. Faith the size of a mustard seed. And we can do great things. Significant things. Mind-blowing things. And you know, my friends, the same is true for the gifts that we offer. Now, there are a lot of people out there who think that if I had more money, and if I had more time, and if I had more talent and more knowledge, then I would be able to do bigger and better and greater things. In other words, if I don't have any of that stuff, I may as well not even bother. But what we fail to realize and remember is that within God's realm, size does not matter. It's the fact that we are willing to give what we have, much like the story of the widow's mite. She didn't have a lot, but she gave what she had, and Jesus welcomed her gift. And he said, I assure you, he said this to his disciples, I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than everyone who's been putting money in the treasury. All of them are giving out of their spare change. But she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she had, what she needed to live on. When we give what we have, even just a little, God is able to multiply it tenfold and 100-fold. Even the smallest gift, even the smallest amount of time, even the smallest bit of talent, God uses that to do the things that God wants done. And even the smallest gift can grow into something that is huge. An example of that is our apportionment system here in the United Methodist Church. We are a part of a connection with other United Methodist churches throughout the world. And one of the things that we are all asked to do is to contribute to the work of the global church. It's called our apportionments. It's what God has called United Methodists to do. Here at Faith, we have been asked to give approximately $20,000 in apportionments next year. Now that sounds like a lot of money to us. But I know that there are bigger churches out there that are paying $20,000 a month rather than $20,000 a year. So ours, then, in comparison, seems like a drop in the bucket, doesn't it? It seems like the size of a mustard seed. But that doesn't make our contribution, our gifts, any less important. Because without our gifts and without the gifts of other smaller churches like ours, the United Methodist Church would not be able to do the things that God has called us as a church to do. So, what are some of the things that our apportionments have done? Well, last year at annual conference, they gave us these little cards, a deck of cards. It's actually, regular deck of cards, but on them are descriptions of things that our apportionments have done. I've chosen just 2 of them. Thank you, church. Because of your generosity, African communities received vital health care from hundreds of healthcare workers who obtained their degrees in nursing and public health from Africa University. Your Sunday offering helped to fund this university and reach others far beyond the walls of your church. Our gifts are helping train people in Africa. An immigrant family accessed affordable health care and attended health education classes at Wesley Community Center. The WCC doctors provided exam and treatment services to patients in need. Jesus asked us to love our neighbors and tend to his sheep. Your faithful generosity funded this Christ-called ministry. That's only 2 examples out of 52 that our apportionments help to fund. Isn't it awesome what our mustard seed-sized gifts can do? Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that all of us should give just a little, because that's not what the scriptures tell us. In Deuteronomy 16, verse 17, God commands the Israelites to give according to their means. It says, every person must bring a gift in proportion to God's blessings upon you. God required the Israelites to give a tithe, a tenth of what they had. And although Jesus never mentioned tithing except when he was being critical of the Pharisees, Paul did write these words to his church in Corinth. Concerning the collection of the money for God's people, you should do what I have directed the churches in Galatia to do. On the first day of the week, each of you should set aside whatever you can afford from what you earn so that the collection won't be delayed until I come. We are called to give according to our means. And the tithe is a good place to start. Now, some of us are able to give a tenth of our income, a tenth of what we earn. Some of us can even afford to give more. And for some, a tenth is more than we can give. But even if a tenth is too much, we can't let that stop us from giving altogether. We should all give something, because when we do, God takes our gifts, both large and small, and transforms them into something good. Whether that we're talking about gifts of time, talent, or money, God takes those gifts and, just like the mustard seed, makes them into something really, really big. And we like that, don't we? Because we Americans like things that are big. All we have to do is have faith. Faith the size of a mustard seed. Faith in the one that has the power to take our gifts, our time, our talents, and our money, big and small, and turn them into what God needs them to be. Just like the tiny mustard seed, God plants our gifts, waters it, nurtures it, then watches it grow into a bush so big that the birds of the air can make a home in its branches. Think of all the things that God can do with our gifts. All it takes is a little faith. Can I get an amen?